The smell of charred meat filled the small cabin as Emma Hartford stood over the cast-iron skillet, tears streaming down her face, while smoke curled toward the wooden ceiling beams. And she wondered how everything in her life had come to this moment of absolute failure on a Tuesday evening in September 1875, here in the unforgiving territory of Wyoming, where even cooking a simple supper seemed impossible. She had been trying so hard. Ever since her father died 3 months ago from pneumonia, leaving her alone on this remote homestead, 15 miles outside of Cheyenne, Emma had been struggling to keep everything together. The ranch was small, just 40 acres with a dozen cattle and some chickens, but it was all she had left in the world. At 22 years old, she had never imagined she would be completely alone, trying to manage a property, tend to animals, fix fences, haul water, chop wood, and somehow remember to feed herself at the end of each exhausting day. Tonight she had been so tired after spending hours trying to repair the chicken coop that a fox had torn into the night before. She had lost 2 hens, which meant 2 less sources of eggs, 2 less potential meals. The loss had hit her harder than it should have, but everything felt overwhelming lately. By the time she came inside to cook supper, her hands were blistered, her dress was torn at the hem, and her mind was foggy with exhaustion. She had put the venison steak in the skillet and then made the fatal mistake of sitting down for just a moment, just one moment to rest her aching feet. But that moment had stretched longer than she intended, and by the time she smelled the burning meat and jerked awake, the damage was done. The steak was black on one side, smoking and ruined. That was when the tears started, not just because of the burnt supper, but because of everything. Because she was alone and scared and had no idea if she could keep this ranch going through the winter. Because she was running low on supplies and had barely enough money to buy flour and coffee. Because her father had been her whole world, and now he was gone, and she had never felt more lost. She was crying so hard that she did not hear the knock at the door. She did not hear it open. She only realized someone was there when a deep voice said, "Ma'am, are you all right?" Emma spun around, wiping frantically at her tears, and found herself staring at a tall cowboy standing in her doorway. He was removing his hat, revealing dark hair that needed cutting, and his weathered face showed concern in the lantern light. He looked to be in his late 20s, with strong features and gray eyes that seemed kind, despite the hardness that frontier life carved into most men. "I apologize for walking in uninvited," he said quickly, seeing her startled expression. "I knocked several times, but when I smelled smoke, I got worried. I am looking for work and saw your place from the road. Thought I would ask if you needed a ranch hand." Emma tried to compose herself, but it was useless. She was still holding the spatula, still standing over the ruined supper, tears still wet on her cheeks. "I cannot afford to hire anyone," she managed to say, her voice breaking. "I can barely afford to feed myself, as you can clearly see." The cowboy looked at the burnt meat in the skillet, then back at her tear-stained face. Something shifted in his expression, a softness that seemed out of place on such a rugged man. "That supper does not look so bad," he said. Emma let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "It is completely burnt. It is ruined, just like everything else." "Ma'am, I have eaten things that would make that steak look like a fancy restaurant meal," the cowboy said, stepping further into the cabin. "I once ate a rabbit that was so overcooked it was like chewing leather, and I was grateful for every bite. If you were planning to throw that meat away, I would be happy to take it off your hands. I have been riding for 2 days with nothing but jerky and hardtack." Emma stared at him, certain he was just being kind, but there was something genuine in his face. "You cannot possibly want to eat this," she said. "Try me," he replied with a slight smile. She did not know what else to do. Her tears were slowing, more from shock at having a stranger in her home than anything else, and she found herself putting the burnt steak on a chipped plate and setting it on the small wooden table. The cowboy sat down without waiting for an invitation, and Emma watched in amazement as he cut into the blackened meat and took a bite. She waited for him to grimace, to politely spit it out, to admit it was inedible. Instead, he chewed thoughtfully and swallowed. "This is good," he said. "Really good. The burnt parts have a nice flavor, almost like it has been smoked." "You are lying," Emma said flatly. "No, ma'am, I'm not," he insisted, taking another bite. "You would be surprised what a man considers good food after spending months on a cattle drive, eating nothing but beans and bad coffee. This is a feast." Emma sank into the chair across from him, watching in disbelief as he continued to eat. He was not just taking polite bites either. He was genuinely eating like a man who was hungry and appreciative of the food in front of him. "I am Josiah Creek," he said between bites. "Most people call me Joe. I have been working ranches since I was 15, moving from place to place. Just finished a drive up from Texas and thought I would see about finding something more permanent before winter sets in." "Emma Hartford," she replied quietly. "This was my father's ranch. He died 3 months ago." Joe's expression grew more serious. "I am sorry for your loss. That must be incredibly hard." The simple acknowledgement of her pain, spoken with such straightforward kindness, made Emma's eyes well up again. She blinked hard, trying to keep more tears from falling. "I am not managing very well," she admitted. "I grew up on this ranch, but my father did most of the heavy work. I helped with cooking and gardening and tending the chickens, but I never had to do everything myself. I am learning, but it is so much harder than I thought it would be." Joe finished the last bite of the burnt steak and looked at her directly. "You need help," he said, "and I need work and a place to stay. I was not lying about looking for a job. What if we made an arrangement? I work for you, help you keep this ranch going, and in exchange, you provide meals and let me sleep in your barn. I do not need wages right away. We can figure that out once you sell some cattle and have money coming in." Emma's heart leaped at the offer, but practicality and caution held her back. "I do not know you," she said. "For all I know, you could rob me in my sleep or worse." "That is fair," Joe acknowledged. "I can give you references if you want to write to some of the ranchers I have worked for. Matt Dawson over in Colorado, Thomas Riley down in New Mexico. They will vouch for me. But I understand if you want to think about it. I can camp down by your creek tonight and come back tomorrow for your answer." The thought of sending him away filled Emma with unexpected panic. The ranch was so isolated, and she had been alone for so long. Even just these few minutes of conversation with another human being had reminded her how desperately lonely she had been. "There is a venison stew I made yesterday," she found herself saying. "It is not burnt if you are still hungry." Joe's face brightened. "That sounds wonderful, ma'am." Emma ladled out 2 bowls of the stew, which actually had turned out well, and they ate together in a surprisingly comfortable silence. When they finished, Joe insisted on washing the dishes while Emma sat and directed him to where things belonged. It felt strange to have someone else in her space, taking care of tasks, but it also felt like the first time in months that the crushing weight on her shoulders had lifted even slightly. "You can sleep in the barn tonight," Emma said finally. "There is clean hay in the loft and some extra blankets I can bring you. Tomorrow, we can talk more about an arrangement." "Thank you, ma'am," Joe said with genuine gratitude. "I promise you will not regret this." After Emma brought him blankets and showed him where the barn was, she returned to the cabin and lay in her narrow bed, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. For the first time since her father died, she did not cry herself to sleep. Instead, she felt a small flutter of something that might have been hope. The next morning, Emma woke to the sound of an axe splitting wood. She got dressed quickly and went outside to find Joe, already hard at work, adding to her woodpile. He had also collected the eggs from the chickens and hauled 2 buckets of fresh water from the creek. "I hope I did not overstep," he said when he saw her. "I figured I might as well make myself useful." "No, this is wonderful," Emma said, looking at everything he had already accomplished. "I usually do not get all this done until noon." She made breakfast, biscuits, eggs, and bacon. The biscuits came out a little lopsided, and she found herself tensing as Joe bit into one, irrationally worried he would find fault with her cooking after being so kind about the burnt steak. "These are delicious," he said warmly. "You are a fine cook, Miss Hartford." "Even when I burn things?" she asked with a slight smile. "Even then," he confirmed, "though I hope you will not think less of me if I admit I prefer the food when it is not burnt." Emma actually laughed, and the sound surprised her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed. They ate together as the morning sun streamed through the cabin windows, and Emma found herself studying Joe when he was not looking. He had kind eyes, she decided, and there was something steady about him, something that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in a long time. After breakfast, they walked the property together so Emma could show Joe what needed to be done. The list was overwhelming: fences that needed mending, a barn roof that was leaking, cattle that needed to be moved to better grazing, a wagon wheel that needed fixing. Joe took it all in without seeming daunted. "We can handle this," he said confidently. It will take time, but none of it is impossible. First priority should be getting that barn roof fixed before the weather turns. Then we tackle the fences so your cattle do not wander off, or predators do not get in. The fact that he said "we" made Emma's chest feel warm. She had been facing everything alone for so long that having a partner, even a temporary one, felt like a miracle. They fell into a routine over the following days. Joe worked from sunrise to sunset, tackling the endless list of repairs and chores. Emma cooked 3 meals a day, tended the garden, cared for the chickens, and helped Joe with whatever tasks she could manage. Every evening, they ate supper together at the small table in the cabin, and Joe always praised her cooking enthusiastically, even when things did not turn out quite right. One evening, about a week after Joe arrived, Emma was making fried chicken for supper. She had the fire too hot, and the outside of the chicken burned before the inside was fully cooked. When she put the plate in front of Joe, she felt that familiar wave of frustration and inadequacy. "I am sorry," she said. "I burnt it again." Joe cut into the chicken and took a bite. "It is perfect," he declared. "Crispy on the outside, juicy on the inside. This is exactly how I like it." "Joe, you do not have to lie to make me feel better," Emma said, sitting down with a sigh. "I know I'm not a very good cook. My father used to say I could burn water if given the chance." Joe's expression grew serious. "Miss Hartford, I want you to understand something. I have worked on a lot of ranches and eaten a lot of meals cooked by a lot of different people. Some were good cooks, some were terrible. But you know what made the real difference? Whether the person cooking actually cared about the people they were feeding. You care. I can taste it in every meal you make. So what if things get a little burnt sometimes? That does not change the fact that you are putting effort and heart into the food. That matters more than perfect technique." Emma felt tears prick her eyes again. But this time, they were not tears of frustration. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that." "And for what it is worth," Joe added with a grin, "I genuinely do like the burnt parts. Always have. My mother used to fight with me because I would always want the crusty edges of everything." Emma smiled. "Tell me about your mother. Tell me about your family." Joe's expression grew distant. "My mother died when I was 12. Some kind of fever that swept through our town in Missouri. My father was a difficult man, drank too much, had a mean temper. I left home at 15 and have been working ranches ever since. Never stayed in one place too long. Never really had a reason to." "That sounds lonely," Emma said softly. "It was," Joe admitted. "But I got used to it, I suppose. Started to think maybe I was just meant to be a drifter, moving from place to place, never putting down roots." "And now?" Emma asked. Joe looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart skip. "Now, I'm starting to think maybe I was just waiting to find the right place to stay." The air between them felt charged with something unspoken. Emma looked down at her plate, feeling heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the warm cabin. Over the next few weeks, Emma found herself looking forward to the evenings more and more. The days were filled with hard work, but the evenings were when she and Joe would sit together and talk for hours. He told her stories about the cattle drives he had been on, about wild towns and dangerous river crossings and stampedes under starlit skies. She told him about growing up on the ranch, about her mother who had died when Emma was just 8, about her father who had been gruff but loving. They laughed together over meals. They worked together in comfortable silence. And slowly, so slowly that Emma almost did not notice it happening, the loneliness that had been crushing her began to lift. One evening in early October, Emma was making beef stew for supper. She was stirring the pot, making sure everything was cooking evenly, when she got distracted by Joe coming in from the barn. He had taken off his shirt to wash up, and Emma found herself staring at his broad shoulders and the muscles in his arms. She was so distracted that she did not notice the bottom of the stew starting to burn until she smelled it. "No, no, no," she muttered, stirring frantically, but it was too late. The bottom layer was burnt, and that burnt flavor would permeate the whole pot. She felt the frustration rise up again, that sense of failure that she could not seem to shake. She ladled the stew into bowls, knowing it was ruined, and set them on the table with more force than necessary. "I burnt it again," she said, her voice tight. "The whole thing tastes like charcoal now." Joe sat down and tasted the stew. "It is not that bad," he said. "Just a little smoky flavor." "Joe, please do not," Emma said, and to her horror, she felt tears starting again. I am so tired of being bad at this. I am tired of burning things and messing up and feeling like I cannot do anything right. Joe set down his spoon and reached across the table, taking her hand in his. The touch sent electricity through Emma's whole body. "Emma," he said, using her first name for the first time, "you are one of the strongest, most capable women I have ever met. You are running this entire ranch, mostly by yourself, after suffering a terrible loss. You get up every morning and face another hard day without complaining. You take care of the animals, you keep the house, you work alongside me fixing fences and hauling supplies. So you burn supper sometimes. So what? That does not define you." Emma looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. "You really do not mind?" she asked. "You really do not mind eating burnt food?" "I really do not mind," Joe said firmly. "In fact, I would be happy to eat your burnt suppers every single night for the rest of my life, if it meant I got to stay here with you." The words hung in the air between them. Emma's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure Joe must be able to hear it. "Joe?" she breathed. He stood up, still holding her hand, and came around the table. He knelt beside her chair so they were at eye level. "Emma, I know I have only been here a month, but in that month I have come to care for you deeply. You are kind and brave and beautiful, and being here with you feels like the first real home I have had since my mother died. I do not want to leave when the work is done. I do not want to drift anymore. I want to stay here with you, if you will have me." Emma felt like her heart might burst. "I do not want you to leave either," she admitted. "I have been dreading the day when you might say the work is finished and you need to move on. Joe, I think I am falling in love with you." The smile that broke across Joe's face was like the sun coming out. "I am already in love with you," he said. "I think I have been since the first night when I ate that burnt steak and saw how hard you were trying to hold everything together." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Emma did not want to pull away. She wanted this more than she had wanted anything in a long time. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet and perfect. Emma kissed him back, pouring all her loneliness and hope and newfound joy into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. Joe rested his forehead against hers. "Does this mean I can move out of the barn?" he asked with a teasing tone. Emma laughed and swatted his shoulder. "We are not married yet, Joe Creek. You will stay in that barn like a gentleman until we make this proper." "Then I guess I better talk to the preacher in town about performing a wedding," Joe said, still grinning. "How does next month sound?" "Next month sounds perfect," Emma agreed, feeling happier than she had felt in years. They eventually returned to their supper, and the burnt stew really did not taste that bad, or maybe Emma just did not care anymore. They ate and talked about the future, about building up the ranch, about the life they would create together. True to his word, Joe rode into Cheyenne the next week and spoke with Reverend Thompson about performing a wedding ceremony. The Reverend was happy to oblige and suggested the second Saturday in November. Emma had been worried about the cost of a wedding, but Joe assured her they did not need anything fancy. Just a simple ceremony with a few witnesses would be perfect. Emma spent the next few weeks altering her mother's wedding dress, which she had carefully preserved in a trunk. It was old-fashioned, but Emma loved it because it connected her to her mother. She worked on it in the evenings while Joe was in the barn, wanting it to be a surprise. The night before the wedding, Emma made a special supper. She was determined not to burn anything, so she took extra care with everything. She made fried pork chops, mashed potatoes, gravy, and green beans from her garden that she had canned in the fall. She even made an apple pie for dessert. Everything was going perfectly until she got distracted thinking about the wedding and let the pork chops stay on the heat too long. Once again, they came out burnt on the bottom. Emma wanted to cry from frustration. Of all the nights to ruin supper, why did it have to be the night before her wedding? But when Joe came in and saw the food on the table, he just smiled that warm smile she had come to love so much. "It smells amazing," he said, kissing her cheek. "The pork chops are burnt," Emma said miserably. "Good," Joe replied, sitting down. "You know those are my favorite." Despite herself, Emma laughed. "You are impossible." "I am in love," Joe corrected. "There is a difference." They ate supper together, their last meal before they would be married, and Joe made a show of eating every bite of his burnt pork chop, and then asking if there were any more. You cannot possibly want seconds, Emma said. I absolutely want seconds, Joe insisted. In fact, I am looking forward to a lifetime of seconds, and thirds, and whatever else you are willing to give me. Emma served him another pork chop, shaking her head but smiling. You are going to get tired of burnt food eventually. Never, Joe said firmly. Emma, I need you to understand something. When I eat your cooking, burnt or not, I am not just eating food. I am tasting the care you put into it. I am tasting home. I spent 15 years wandering, eating meals that were just fuel, nothing more. But your food, even when it is burnt, tastes like love, and I will never get tired of that. Emma came around the table and wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his shoulder. How did I get so lucky? She whispered. I am the lucky one, Joe replied, covering her hands with his. The next day dawned clear and cold, perfect November weather in Wyoming. Emma wore her mother's dress, and Joe wore the only suit he owned, which he had carefully brushed and pressed. They rode into Cheyenne together in the wagon, and Emma felt like she was floating. The ceremony at the small white church was simple but beautiful. A few of the neighboring ranchers came, people who had known Emma's father and who had been worried about Emma managing alone. They seemed relieved and happy to see her marrying a good man. Reverend Thompson performed the ceremony with warmth and sincerity, and when Joe kissed Emma as his wife, she felt like her heart might overflow with happiness. They had a small gathering afterward at the town's only restaurant, where the neighbors treated them to a meal. Everyone was kind and welcoming to Joe, and Emma could see that he was touched by the acceptance. For a man who had spent so many years drifting and alone, being welcomed into a community must have meant a great deal. As the sun began to set, Emma and Joe rode back to the ranch, now truly their ranch together. Joe carried Emma over the threshold of the cabin, both of them laughing, and they began their life as husband and wife. That first winter as a married couple was hard. Wyoming winters were brutal, and there were days when the snow was so deep that they could barely get to the barn to tend the animals. But they faced it together, and that made all the difference. Joe kept the cabin warm, with wood he had spent the fall stockpiling. Emma cooked hearty meals to keep them both strong, and at night they lay together in the warmth of their bed, talking and dreaming about the future. Emma still burnt food sometimes. One memorable evening in January, she somehow managed to burn a pot of soup, which Joe had previously insisted was impossible to burn. But, true to his word, Joe ate it all anyway and asked for seconds. You are insane, Emma told him, laughing as she ladled out more of the scorched soup. I am consistent, Joe replied with a grin. I promised to eat your burnt suppers every night for the rest of my life, and I meant it. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Emma and Joe worked on improving the ranch. They fixed the barn roof properly, replaced the rotting fence posts, and even built a new chicken coop that was much more secure against predators. Joe proved to be an excellent cattleman, and under his care, their small herd began to thrive. In April, Emma realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited to be sure before telling Joe. When she finally told him one evening over supper, his face lit up with such pure joy that Emma started crying happy tears. We are going to have a baby, Joe said wonderingly, coming around the table to pull Emma into his arms. Emma, we are going to be parents. Are you happy? Emma asked, even though she could see that he was. I am more than happy, Joe said. I am blessed. I never thought I would have a family of my own. I never thought I would have a home. And now I have both, with you. They held each other for a long time, both of them overwhelmed with emotion. Finally, Emma pulled back and smiled up at her husband. I hope I am a better mother than I am a cook, she said. You are going to be an amazing mother, Joe said firmly. And you are an excellent cook, burnt food and all. Throughout Emma's pregnancy, Joe was attentive and protective. He took over the heavier chores completely, insisting that Emma rest more. Emma appreciated his care, but also felt a bit restless. She was used to working hard, and being told to take it easy was frustrating. I am pregnant, not broken, she told Joe one day when he refused to let her help him mend a fence. I know, Joe said gently, but you are carrying our child, and I want to make sure you are both safe and healthy. Please, Emma, let me do this for you. Seeing the genuine concern in his eyes, Emma relented. She focused her energy on preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, and fixing up a corner of the cabin to serve as a nursery. One evening in late June, Emma was making fried chicken for supper. It was a hot day, and the heat from the stove made the cabin feel like an oven. Emma was tired and uncomfortable in the late stages of her pregnancy, and she was not paying close attention to the cooking. Inevitably, the chicken burned. Emma looked at the blackened pieces of meat and felt tears well up, which happened a lot these days thanks to her pregnancy emotions. "I cannot even cook a simple meal without ruining it," she said, her voice breaking. Joe came up behind her and wrapped his arms gently around her, resting his hands on her swollen belly. "That chicken looks perfect to me," he said, kissing her neck. "Joe, it is burnt," Emma said, but she was smiling despite herself. "Then I guess I will just have to eat extra to make sure none of it goes to waste," Joe replied. "You know burnt food is my favorite." "You are ridiculous," Emma said, leaning back against his chest. "I am in love," Joe corrected, just as he always did. They ate the burnt chicken together, and Joe did indeed ask for seconds. He also ate thirds, making Emma laugh at his determination to prove his point. "Our child is going to think it is normal to eat burnt food all the time," Emma said. "Our child is going to grow up knowing that love matters more than perfection," Joe replied, "and that is a good lesson." In December of 1876, their son was born. It was a long and difficult labor, but the local midwife, Mrs. Patterson, was skilled and patient. When Emma finally heard her baby's first cry, she felt a surge of love so powerful it took her breath away. Joe was there for the birth, which was not always common for men of that era, but he had insisted. When Mrs. Patterson placed the baby in his arms, Emma saw tears streaming down her husband's face. "He is perfect," Joe whispered. "Emma, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas after Emma's father. Little Thomas was a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs and his father's gray eyes. Joe was a devoted father from the very beginning, taking turns with Emma for the nighttime feedings and changings, walking the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, singing to him in a surprisingly pleasant voice. As Thomas grew from an infant into a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Joe's hard work and expertise, combined with Emma's careful management of their finances, meant they were able to expand their herd and even hire a part-time ranch hand to help with the work. They were not rich by any means, but they were comfortable and secure, which was more than many frontier families could say. Emma still burnt food regularly. It became something of a joke between her and Joe. No matter how hard she tried to pay attention, something always seemed to distract her at the crucial moment, and dinner would end up overdone. But Joe never complained. He always ate everything on his plate and asked for seconds, and his genuine appreciation never wavered. One evening, when Thomas was about 2 years old, Emma was making pot roast for supper. She had put it in the oven and told herself firmly to keep track of time. But Thomas had a tumble in the yard and scraped his knee, and while Emma was cleaning him up and comforting him, the roast overcooked and the edges burned. Emma sighed as she pulled the roast out of the oven. Thomas, perched on a chair to watch, asked, "Is it burnt, Mama?" "A little bit," Emma admitted. "Papa likes burnt food," Thomas said, with the simple certainty of a child. Emma smiled and ruffled his hair. "Yes, he does." When Joe came in for supper, Thomas immediately announced, "Mama burnt the roast, but it is okay because you like burnt food." Joe laughed and picked up his son, tossing him in the air and catching him, while Thomas squealed with delight. "That is right, Tom. Burnt food is the best food." "Why?" Thomas asked. Joe set his son down and looked at Emma with such love in his eyes that she felt her heart swell. "Because when your mama cooks, even if things get a little burnt, it means she is taking care of us. It means she loves us. And that makes everything taste better." Thomas seemed to accept this explanation with the easy logic of childhood. They sat down together as a family and ate the burnt pot roast, and Joe did indeed ask for seconds. After Thomas was tucked into bed, Emma and Joe sat together on the porch, watching the stars come out over the Wyoming prairie. Emma leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling content. "I never imagined my life would turn out like this," she said softly. "When Papa died, I thought I would lose everything. I thought I would end up having to sell the ranch and move to town, to find work as a seamstress or a laundress. I never imagined I would be this happy." Joe kissed the top of her head. "That first night, when I saw you crying over that burnt steak, I knew you were special. I knew you were someone worth staying for. And I was right." "Do you ever miss it?" Emma asked. "The traveling, the freedom, the adventure?" Not for a second, Joe said firmly. This is the adventure I want. Building a life with you, raising our son, growing old together. That is more exciting to me than any cattle drive or wild town. Emma tilted her face up to kiss him. I love you, Joe Creek. I love you too, Emma Creek, Joe replied, burnt food and all. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. Finally, Emma said, I want to have more children. I want Thomas to have brothers and sisters. I would like that too, Joe agreed. This ranch could use a few more hands anyway. Emma laughed and swatted his arm. Is that the only reason you want more children? For the free labor? Of course not, Joe said, grinning. I also want more people to appreciate your burnt cooking. You are terrible, Emma said, but she was smiling. Over the next few years, their family grew. In 1878, they had a daughter they named Caroline, who had Emma's dark hair and sunny disposition. In 1880, another son arrived, whom they named James. The cabin that had once felt too big and lonely for just Emma was now bursting with noise and life and love. Emma was busy from morning to night with 3 young children and all the work of the ranch. Joe hired on another full-time ranch hand to help manage the growing herd, and they built a small bunkhouse for the hands to stay in. The ranch was thriving beyond what Emma had ever dreamed possible. But no matter how busy they were, Emma and Joe always made time for family suppers. Every evening, they gathered around the table, and Emma would serve whatever she had managed to cook that day. More often than not, something was at least a little burnt, but it became a family tradition. The children grew up thinking it was normal, and they all learned their father's habit of asking for seconds, no matter what was served. One evening, when Thomas was about 7, Caroline was 5, and James was 3, Emma was making pork chops for supper. She was helping James with something when she smelled burning. She rushed to the stove, but once again, she was too late. The pork chops were badly burnt on one side. Emma felt the old frustration rise up. After all these years, she still could not seem to master the simple task of cooking a meal without burning it. She served the food with an apology, expecting the children to complain. Instead, Thomas said, "These look good, Mama." Caroline nodded in agreement. "I like when they are crispy." Even little James, who was still learning to use his fork properly, dug in without complaint. Joe met Emma's eyes across the table and smiled. "See, everyone loves your cooking." After the children were in bed, Emma and Joe sat together on the porch as they often did. Emma was quiet, thinking about how much had changed since that first night when Joe had walked into her cabin and eaten her burnt steak. "What are you thinking about?" Joe asked, taking her hand. "I was thinking about how you changed my life," Emma said. "I was so lost when you found me. I did not think I could keep going, and then you appeared, and everything got better." "You changed my life too," Joe said. "I was so lost, Emma. I had been drifting for years, never belonging anywhere, never having anyone who cared if I lived or died. And then I found you, and suddenly I had a purpose. I had a home. I had love." "Do you remember that first night?" Emma asked. "When I was crying over that burnt steak?" "I remember everything about that night," Joe said. "I remember how brave you looked, even while crying. I remember how you tried to apologize for the burnt food. I remember thinking that I would do anything to make you smile." "You did make me smile," Emma said. "You ate that terrible steak and asked for seconds, and I thought you were crazy. But it was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for me." "It was not kindness," Joe said. "It was self-preservation. I knew immediately that I wanted to stay, and I figured the best way to ensure that was to prove I could appreciate your cooking." Emma laughed. "So you admit it was a strategy?" "A very successful strategy," Joe confirmed, grinning. "I got to stay, I got to marry you, and I have been eating your burnt suppers every night for years now. I would say my plan worked perfectly." "And you really do not mind?" Emma asked, even though she knew the answer. "You really do not mind that I still burn things after all this time?" Joe turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Emma, I need you to understand something. I do not just tolerate your burnt cooking. I genuinely love it, because every time I eat something you have made, burnt or not, I am reminded of how blessed I am. I am reminded that I have a wife who works herself to exhaustion taking care of our family. I am reminded that I have a home and children and a life I never thought I would have. So, no, I do not mind the burnt food. I treasure it because it represents everything good in my life." Emma felt tears welling up, but they were happy tears. "I love you so much," she whispered. "I love you too," Joe said, kissing her gently. now and always. As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow and prosper. Thomas grew into a strong young man who loved working alongside his father. Caroline was bright and curious, always reading books and asking questions about everything. James was adventurous and fearless, constantly getting into good-natured trouble. In 1885, Emma and Joe had their fourth child, another daughter they named Grace. She was a surprise, as Emma had thought they were finished having children, but she was a welcome surprise nonetheless. Grace was gentle and sweet, and she quickly became the baby of the family that everyone doted on. Emma was now in her early 30s, and Joe was nearing 40. They had built a good life together, expanding the original 40-acre homestead to over 200 acres with a substantial herd of cattle. They had a comfortable house, having added on to the original cabin over the years. They had healthy children, loyal ranch hands, and the respect of their community. But the thing Emma treasured most was still those evening suppers with her family. No matter how much their circumstances had improved, she still managed to burn something regularly. And Joe still ate it all and asked for seconds. The children had learned to do the same, understanding without being told that this was how their family showed love. One evening in the fall of 1886, Emma was making fried chicken for supper. It had been a busy day, with Grace teething and fussy, James getting into a fight with one of the neighbor boys, and Caroline needing help with her lessons. Emma was exhausted, and she was not paying close attention to the chicken. By the time she realized it was burning, it was too late. The chicken was badly charred, and Emma looked at it with dismay. After more than a decade of cooking for her family, she still could not seem to get through a week without burning something. Joe came in from the barn and immediately came over to see what she was making. "Fried chicken," he said with pleasure. "My favorite." "It is burnt," Emma said flatly. "Perfect," Joe replied, as he always did. They called the children into supper, and everyone sat around the table. Thomas, now 13, had just started helping with the cattle drives and was full of stories about his day. Caroline, 11, was excited about a new book she had gotten from the teacher in town. James, 8, was still sulking a bit about the fight he had gotten into. And Grace, just a year old, sat in a high chair that Joe had made, babbling happily. Emma served the burnt chicken, and everyone dug in without complaint. Joe ate his portion and then, as he had done countless times before, said, "Emma, this is delicious. Could I have seconds?" Thomas immediately chimed in, "Me too, Mama." "And me," Caroline added. Even James, despite his sulking, held out his plate for more. Emma served seconds to everyone, shaking her head, but smiling. "You are all crazy," she said affectionately. "We are all blessed," Joe corrected, meeting her eyes across the table. After supper, after the children were in bed, Emma and Joe sat on their porch. The Wyoming night was cool and clear, and Emma could see thousands of stars overhead. She leaned against her husband, feeling grateful for everything they had built together. "Joe," she said quietly, "do you remember what you said that first night? When you said you would be happy to eat my burnt suppers every night for the rest of your life?" "Of course I remember," Joe replied. "It is still true." "We have been married for 11 years, Emma said. "You have eaten my burnt cooking for 11 years, and you have never once complained. You have always asked for seconds, just like you promised." "And I always will," Joe said. "Emma, you gave me a home when I had none. You gave me a family when I thought I would always be alone. You gave me purpose and love and a reason to stop drifting. Eating your burnt suppers every night is the smallest thing I can do to show you how much you mean to me." Emma turned to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into that kiss. When they pulled apart, she said, "You gave me everything too. When Papa died, I thought my life was over. I thought I would lose the ranch and have nothing, but then you appeared and saved me." "We saved each other," Joe said simply. They sat together in the peaceful night, holding hands, comfortable in their love and their life together. Inside the house, their children slept safely. On their land, their cattle grazed peacefully. Everything they had built together was solid and real and lasting. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges as they always did. There were harsh winters and dry summers. There were years when cattle prices were good and years when they were bad. There were illnesses and injuries and all the normal difficulties of frontier life. But through it all, Emma and Joe faced everything together, supported by the strong foundation of their love. Emma continued to cook for her family, and she continued to burn things with surprising regularity. And Joe continued to eat everything she made and ask for seconds, teaching their children by example what it meant to show love and appreciation. Thomas grew into a fine young man and eventually married a sweet girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. They built a house on the Hartford Creek Ranch and worked alongside Joe, learning everything they needed to know about running the operation. In 1892, they had a son of their own, making Emma and Joe grandparents for the first time. Caroline became a teacher, opening a small school in Cheyenne, but coming home on weekends to help on the ranch. She was intelligent and patient, and all the local children loved her. James, true to his adventurous nature, left home at 18 to try his hand at prospecting in Colorado. Emma worried about him constantly, but Joe reminded her that young men needed to find their own way. James eventually came back home a few years later, having decided that ranching was in his blood after all. He married and settled down, building his own small ranch adjacent to the family property. Grace grew into a beautiful young woman who inherited her mother's caring nature and her father's steady temperament. She was in no hurry to marry, content to help her parents as they grew older. As Emma entered her 40s and then her 50s, she found that her cooking did not improve with age. If anything, she burned things more often as she got distracted by grandchildren or by the various aches and pains that came with getting older. But Joe, now in his 60s, still ate everything she made with genuine appreciation and still asked for seconds. One evening in 1900, Emma was making stew for supper. She and Joe were alone that night, as all the children were grown and living their own lives. Grace had gone to help Caroline with something in town, so it was just the two of them, like it had been in the very beginning. Emma was tired after a long day and was not paying attention. The stew burned on the bottom of the pot, just as it had so many times before. Emma looked at it and felt a wave of frustration that was tempered by 25 years of experience. "I burnt it again," she said as Joe came in. Joe walked over and kissed her cheek. "Good," he said. "You know I like it that way." They sat down together at the table that had held so many family meals over the years. Joe took a bite of the burnt stew and smiled. "Delicious," he declared. "Could I have seconds?" Emma laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "After all these years, you still ask for seconds." "After all these years, you still act surprised when I do," Joe replied with a grin. Emma served him more stew, and they ate together in comfortable silence. When they were finished, Emma said, "Joe, do you ever think about that first night, when you walked into my cabin and found me crying over that burnt steak?" "I think about it all the time," Joe said. "It was the best night of my life because it was the beginning of everything." "I was so lost," Emma remembered. "I did not think I could go on." "And I was so empty," Joe said. "I had been drifting for so long that I did not even remember what it felt like to have a home." "And now look at us," Emma said, gesturing around at the comfortable house they had built together, at the prosperous ranch visible through the windows, at the family photos that lined the walls. "We built all this together." "We did," Joe agreed, "and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every early morning, every hard winter, every burnt supper. I would do it all again just to end up here with you." Emma felt tears in her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you, Joe Creek. I have loved you since that first night when you ate my terrible cooking and asked for seconds." "I love you too, Emma Creek," Joe said, "and I will keep asking for seconds for as long as I live." As the new century began, Emma and Joe settled into the comfortable rhythm of their later years. They had built a legacy that would continue through their children and grandchildren. The ranch was thriving under Thomas's management, with Joe still helping, but taking on less of the physical work. Emma's burnt suppers became a family legend. The grandchildren would giggle about how Grandma always burned the food, and Grandpa always asked for seconds. Caroline wrote it down in a journal, wanting to preserve the story for future generations. Thomas told his children that it was because of Grandma's burnt steak that Grandpa had stayed, and they all existed. The love story of how a drifting cowboy had fallen in love with a struggling rancher over burnt food became a story that was told and retold at family gatherings. And at the heart of it was a simple truth. Love is not about perfection. Love is about showing up, about staying, about eating burnt suppers and asking for seconds because you value the person who made them more than the quality of the food. In 1905, Emma and Joe celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a big party, inviting neighbors and friends from all over the territory. There were speeches and toasts, and everyone talked about what an inspiration Emma and Joe were, about how their love had remained strong through 3 decades of frontier life. At one point, Thomas stood up to make a speech. "My parents taught me what real love looks like," he said. "It does not look like grand gestures or perfect moments. It looks like my father eating my mother's burnt cooking every single night for 30 years and asking for seconds. It looks like my mother working herself to exhaustion to take care of our family. It looks like 2 people who chose each other and kept choosing each other, day after day, year after year." Everyone applauded, and Emma and Joe held hands, both of them emotional. Later, when they were alone, Joe said, 30 years, and I still feel like the luckiest man alive." "I am the lucky one," Emma replied. "You saved me, Joe." "We saved each other," Joe said, as he always did. That night, Emma made supper for just the 2 of them. She was making pork chops, and of course, she burned them. Joe ate every bite and asked for seconds, and they both laughed about how some things never changed. As they grew older, Emma's health began to decline. She developed arthritis that made cooking painful, but she insisted on continuing to make meals for Joe. Joe worried about her and suggested they hire someone to help with the cooking, but Emma refused. "I have been burning your supper for 35 years, she said stubbornly. "I am not going to stop now." So Emma continued to cook, and Joe continued to eat what she made and ask for seconds. Even when her hands shook and cooking became difficult, even when she had to sit down frequently to rest, Emma persisted, and Joe was always there, always appreciative, always asking for more. In the spring of 1912, Emma's health took a serious turn. The doctor said her heart was weak, that she needed to rest more and work less. Emma reluctantly agreed to let Grace come stay with them to help with the household tasks, but she still insisted on cooking supper for Joe. One evening in June, Emma was making beef stew. Grace tried to help, but Emma shooed her away, wanting to do it herself. She was stirring the pot when she felt a sudden pain in her chest. She gasped and grabbed the edge of the stove. Joe, who had developed an instinct for knowing when Emma needed him, appeared immediately. "Emma," he said, alarm in his voice. "I am fine," Emma insisted, though she was pale and breathing hard. "Just a little dizzy." Joe helped her to a chair and called for Grace. The doctor was summoned, and he confirmed what they all feared. Emma's heart was failing. She might have months, maybe a year if she was lucky, but she needed to rest completely. Emma was devastated, not because she was dying, but because she would not be able to take care of Joe anymore. "Who will cook your supper?" she asked him with tears in her eyes. Joe knelt beside her chair and took her hands gently. "Emma, I do not care about supper. I care about you. Please just rest. Let us take care of you for once." "But you always ask for seconds," Emma said, and she was crying now. "You have asked for seconds every night for 37 years. What will you do if I cannot cook for you anymore?" Joe's own eyes were wet with tears. "Emma, my love, I never cared about the food. I cared about you. I ate your cooking and asked for seconds because it was a way to show you how much I loved you. But I can show you in other ways. Just please rest. Let me take care of you now." Emma did rest, though it went against her nature. Grace moved in permanently to help, and she did the cooking. Joe sat with Emma for hours every day holding her hand, telling her stories, reading to her from the newspaper or from books. But every evening Grace would bring Emma's supper on a tray, and Joe would sit beside her and eat his own meal. And even though Emma was not cooking anymore, Joe would still look at her and say, "That was delicious. I wish I could have seconds." It became their ritual, a way to maintain the connection that had defined their marriage. Emma would smile every time he said it, understanding what he was really saying. "I love you. I choose you. I will always choose you." Emma held on longer than the doctor expected. She lived to see another Christmas, another spring. She lived to meet 2 more great-grandchildren. And every evening, Joe sat beside her and told her he wished he could have seconds. In April of 1913, Emma woke up feeling better than she had in months. She insisted on getting dressed and coming to the kitchen. Grace and Joe both tried to get her to go back to bed, but Emma was determined. "I want to make supper for my husband," she said firmly. "Just one more time." Joe's face was a mixture of love and worry, but he nodded. Grace stayed close by, ready to help if Emma needed her. But Emma worked slowly and carefully, making beef stew, one of Joe's favorites. She was stirring the pot when she got distracted, looking out the window at the ranch she and Joe had built together. By the time she remembered the stew, it was too late. The bottom was burned. Emma looked at the pot and started to laugh. After 38 years, she was still burning supper. Some things truly never changed. She served the burnt stew to Joe, her hands shaking but her heart full. Joe took a bite and smiled that smile she had loved for so many years. "This is delicious," he said. "Could I have seconds?" Emma served him more stew, tears running down her face, but she was smiling. "You are still asking for seconds," she said. "I will always ask for seconds," Joe replied. "I will never stop loving you, Emma, not in this life or the next." They ate together, and it was perfect despite the burnt food, or maybe because of it. It was perfect because it was them, because it was the story of their love distilled into one more meal. That night, Emma went to sleep in Joe's arms, feeling at peace. She had lived a good life, a life filled with love and family and purpose. She had been blessed beyond measure. She passed away peacefully in her sleep, and Joe woke to find her gone. He held her for a long time, crying for the loss of the woman who had been his everything for 38 years. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Emma had touched so many lives in her time, and everyone wanted to pay their respects. The family buried her on the ranch, on a hillside overlooking the land she had loved so much. At the gathering after the funeral, Thomas stood up to speak about his mother. He told the story that everyone in the family knew by heart, about how his father had appeared one night when Emma was crying over a burnt steak, how he had eaten it all and asked for seconds, how he had continued to do so every night for nearly 4 decades. "My mother always thought she was a terrible cook," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "But she was wrong. She was the best cook in the world because she cooked with love. And my father knew that. He understood that the burnt edges and the charred bottoms did not matter. What mattered was the love that went into every meal. That is the legacy my mother left us. Not perfection, but love." Joe sat through the funeral and the gathering in a daze. When everyone finally left and he was alone, he went to the cabin that had been his home for so long. He sat at the table where he and Emma had shared thousands of meals, and he broke down completely. Grace found him there and held him while he cried. "I do not know how to live without her," Joe said. "She was my whole world." "I know, Papa," Grace said gently, "but she would want you to keep going. She would want you to live." Joe did keep going, because his children and grandchildren needed him, because the ranch still needed to be run, because Emma would have wanted him to. But a light had gone out in his life that could never be rekindled. Every evening, Grace made supper for her father, and every evening after he finished eating, Joe would look at his plate and say quietly, "Emma, that was delicious. I wish I could have seconds." Grace never corrected him or pointed out that Emma was not there. She understood that this was his way of keeping Emma's memory alive, of honoring the love they had shared. Joe lived for 5 more years, staying active on the ranch and enjoying his growing family. But everyone could see that part of him had died with Emma. He was waiting, patiently and faithfully, to be reunited with the love of his life. In the summer of 1918, Joe passed away peacefully at the age of 72. He died in his sleep, just as Emma had. And the family liked to think that she had come to bring him home. They buried Joe next to Emma on the hillside, and their graves looked out over the ranch they had built together. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates and one inscription: "They lived a life of love and burnt suppers." The story of Joe and Emma became a family legend that was passed down through the generations. Their descendants continued to work the ranch, building on the foundation that Joe and Emma had established. And at family gatherings, someone would always tell the story of the cowboy who ate burnt steak and asked for seconds, and how that simple act of kindness and love had started a legacy that lasted for generations. Years later, when Thomas's grandchildren asked him about his parents, he would smile and say, "Your great-grandmother was convinced she was a terrible cook. She burned almost everything she made. But your great-grandfather ate it all and always asked for seconds, not because he liked burnt food, but because he loved the woman who made it. That is what real love looks like. It is not about finding someone perfect. It is about finding someone whose imperfections you are willing to embrace, whose burnt suppers you are happy to eat, whose flaws you choose to love." The ranch continued to thrive for decades, eventually growing into one of the most successful operations in Wyoming. But the heart of it was always the love story of Joe and Emma, the drifting cowboy and the struggling rancher who had found each other on a September evening in 1875 and had built a life together, one burnt supper at a time. Their cabin was eventually expanded and modernized, but the family kept the original section intact as a reminder of where it all began. The table where Joe and Emma had shared their first meal together was preserved, and at special family occasions, it would be brought out, and the story would be told again. The story of Joe and Emma reminded everyone who heard it that love is not about grand gestures or perfect moments. Love is about showing up every day. It is about eating burnt suppers and asking for seconds. It is about choosing someone and continuing to choose them, through hard times and good, through tears and laughter, through burnt food and perfect meals. It is about understanding that the burnt edges and charred bottoms do not matter when you are sharing a meal with someone you love. What matters is being together, is the care that goes into the cooking even when it does not turn out right, is the appreciation that says, I see your effort and I value it. Joe and Emma's love story was not extraordinary because it was perfect. It was extraordinary because it was real. They were two ordinary people who found each other at the right moment and built something beautiful together. They faced challenges and hardships, they made mistakes and had regrets, but they never stopped loving each other. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not the burnt suppers or the hard winters or the difficult years. What mattered was that they had loved each other faithfully and completely for 38 years, and that love had created a legacy that would last for generations. The land that Emma had been so afraid of losing when her father died became a thriving ranch that supported multiple families. The cattle that Joe had helped her manage grew into a substantial herd. The children they raised together became successful adults who passed on the values of hard work, love, and family to their own children. And at the center of it all was a simple truth that Joe had understood from the very beginning. Love is not about perfection. Love is about showing someone that you value them exactly as they are, burnt suppers and all. Love is about asking for seconds not because the food is good, but because you cannot get enough of the person who made it. Love is about understanding that the little imperfections and mistakes are not flaws to be fixed, but opportunities to show grace and appreciation. Joe Creek, the drifting cowboy who had spent 15 years wandering without a home, had found his home in Emma Hartford. And Emma, who had been crying over a burnt supper and thought her life was falling apart, had found her salvation in the man who ate that burnt steak and asked for seconds. They had built a beautiful life together, full of love and family and purpose. They had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness, a hungry cowboy eating a burnt supper and asking for more, not because he had to, but because he wanted to show a crying woman that she was worth staying for. That was what their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren remembered. That was what made their love story worth telling and retelling. Not that it was perfect, but that it was real. Not that everything always went right, but that they faced everything together. Not that the food was always good, but that the love that went into making it was always genuine. And so, the story lived on, passed down through the generations, a reminder that the best love stories are not the ones about perfect people having perfect lives. The best love stories are about imperfect people who choose to love each other anyway, who eat burnt suppers and ask for seconds, who show up every day and do the work of loving and being loved. Joe and Emma Creek had lived that kind of love story, and their legacy was proof that it was possible, that even in the harsh environment of the frontier, even in the face of loss and hardship, love could not only survive, but thrive. That two lonely people could find each other and build something beautiful together. That burnt suppers could become a symbol of love instead of failure. Their story ended, as all stories must, with their deaths. But the love they had shared, the family they had created, the legacy they had built continued on. And somewhere on a Wyoming ranch, on a hillside overlooking land that had been worked and loved for generations, two simple headstones stood side by side, marking the graves of a cowboy and his wife who had understood what really mattered in life: love, family, home, and burnt suppers eaten with gratitude and joy, with seconds always requested and gladly given. A tradition that started on a September evening in 1875 and continued until death parted them. a testament to the power of simple kindness and enduring love.